The crystal chandelier cast harsh light across Zara Johnson's face as she stood frozen in the center of the hotel ballroom. Around her, 30-some faces from Lincoln High School's class of 2010 stared with a mixture of pity and judgment. The reunion that was supposed to be a celebration had turned into her worst nightmare. "Look at her," Brandon Matthews said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "Still pretending to be something she's not. Still lying to everyone, including herself." Zara's hands trembled as she clutched her small purse. She had walked into what she thought would be a normal high school reunion. Instead, she found herself surrounded by former classmates who had clearly been fed a story. Brandon stood in the center like a prosecutor, his new wife Candace beside him with a smug smile. "You want to know the truth about Zara Johnson?" Brandon continued, his voice growing louder. "She's been telling people she married some rich guy, but look at her. Look at those fake designer clothes from the outlet mall. Look at that cheap jewelry trying to pass for real diamonds." The crowd murmured. Someone whispered, "I knew something was off." Zara felt her chest tighten. This wasn't how tonight was supposed to go. She had come here feeling confident, happy, and ready to show everyone how well she was doing. Gabriel had offered to come with her, but she wanted to face her past alone. Now she realized how wrong she had been. "She told everyone she lives in a mansion now," Brandon laughed bitterly. "But I know the truth. After our divorce, she was living in a tiny apartment, working 3 jobs just to pay rent. She was so desperate, so broken, that she would have done anything to escape that life." "That's not true," Zara whispered, but her voice was too quiet to carry over Brandon's accusations. Candace stepped forward, her red dress gleaming under the lights. "She's been catfishing some poor man online, pretending to be someone she's not. It's actually sad when you think about it. She's so desperate for validation that she's created this whole fake life." "I saw her last month at the discount grocery store," said Jennifer Walsh, their former class president. "She was using coupons and looked like she hadn't slept in days. I felt so sorry for her that I almost said hello, but she looked embarrassed to be seen." The lies stung because they contained just enough truth to be believable. Yes, Zara had shopped at discount stores during the hardest times after her divorce. Yes, she had worked multiple jobs. But that was before Gabriel. That was before everything changed. "The woman I married was real," Brandon said, wrapping his arm around Candace. "She didn't need to pretend or lie about who she was. She didn't try to trap me with fake pregnancies or emotional manipulation." Zara's eyes widened. "I never." "Oh, you never?" Brandon cut her off. "What about the time you claimed you were pregnant just to get me to stay? What about all those tears and threats when you found out about Candace? You tried everything to keep me trapped in that miserable marriage." The room was completely silent now. Zara felt like she was drowning. Every face around her showed either pity or disgust. These people, who once knew her as the quiet girl who got good grades and helped organize school events, now saw her as some desperate, manipulative woman. "She probably hired an actor to pretend to be her husband for social media photos," Candace suggested. "I've heard of people doing that. It's really pathetic." "That would explain why no one has actually met this mysterious billionaire husband," added Tom Rodriguez, Brandon's former football teammate. "I mean, come on. Zara Johnson married a billionaire? The same girl who wore the same 3 outfits in high school because her family couldn't afford more clothes." The weight of their judgment pressed down on her chest. Zara looked around the room, desperately searching for even one friendly face, but everyone seemed convinced by Brandon's performance. They had made up their minds about her before she even walked through the door. "I think we should feel sorry for her," said Michelle Cooper, speaking in that fake sweet voice Zara remembered from high school. "She's clearly having some kind of mental breakdown. Creating fantasy lives, pretending to be rich, lying about everything. It's actually concerning." "The saddest part," Brandon said, his voice now dripping with false concern, "is that she actually believes her own lies. She's so deep in this fantasy that she can't see reality anymore. Zara, honey, we all know you're struggling. We all know you're alone. You don't have to keep pretending." Zara opened her mouth to defend herself, to tell them the truth, but the words wouldn't come. How could she explain that her life had completely changed? How could she convince them that Gabriel was real, that their love was real, when everything Brandon said sounded so plausible to people who only knew her past struggles? "Maybe we should call someone," suggested another classmate. "Like a counselor or something. She clearly needs help." "No," Zara finally managed to say, her voice stronger now. "I don't need help. I need all of you to stop believing his lies." Brandon laughed. "Still fighting reality, I see. Zara, everyone here cares about you. We want to help you get back to the real world." This fantasy you've created isn't healthy. The crowd pressed closer, their faces full of concern that felt more like mockery. Zara realized that Brandon had planned this perfectly. He had spent months, maybe longer, planting seeds of doubt about her new life. He had turned her former classmates into an audience for her public humiliation. "Please," she whispered, backing toward the wall. "Just leave me alone." "We can't leave you alone when you're clearly in crisis," Candace said sweetly. "As your friends, we have an obligation to help you face the truth." Zara felt trapped. The ballroom that had once held happy memories of prom and graduation now felt like a courtroom where she had already been found guilty. The chandelier light seemed harsher, the walls seemed closer, and the faces around her seemed more hostile with each passing second. She closed her eyes and thought of Gabriel. He had warned her that coming alone might be a mistake. He had offered to accompany her, but she had insisted she could handle seeing Brandon again. She had been so confident in her new life, so sure that nothing her ex-husband could say would affect her. Now, surrounded by the cruel laughter and pitying stares of people she once considered friends, Zara realized she had walked straight into Brandon's trap, and she had no idea how to get out. 3 years earlier, Zara had been a different woman. She had been Mrs. Brandon Matthews for 5 years, believing she had found her happily ever after with her high school sweetheart. They had a small house in the suburbs, and she worked as a medical receptionist while Brandon tried to build his real estate business. The memory hit her like a physical blow as she stood in the ballroom, surrounded by hostile faces. She remembered that Tuesday afternoon when she had come home early from work with a terrible headache. The house had been quiet, which was unusual because Brandon usually played music when he worked from home. She had climbed the stairs to their bedroom, planning to take some medicine and rest. But when she pushed open the door, she found Brandon in bed with Candace Morrison, his secretary from the real estate office. "Zara?" Brandon had jumped up, not even bothering to cover himself. "This isn't what it looks like." But it was exactly what it looked like. Candace, a blonde woman 5 years younger than Zara, had simply smiled from the bed. She hadn't even looked ashamed. "How long?" Zara had whispered, her whole world crashing down around her. "It doesn't matter," Brandon had said, pulling on his pants. "Look, Zara, we need to talk. This marriage isn't working anymore." The casual way he had said it, as if their 5 years together meant nothing, had cut deeper than finding them in bed. Zara had stood there in her work uniform, holding her car keys, while her husband told her their marriage was over. "I've been trying to find a way to tell you," Brandon had continued. "Candace and I, we have something real. Something I never had with you. We're married," Zara had said stupidly as if he had forgotten. "We got married because we thought we were supposed to," Brandon had replied. "High school sweethearts, everyone expected it. But we're different people now. I need someone who challenges me, who makes me want to be better." The implication that Zara didn't challenge him, didn't make him want to be better, had stung worse than the betrayal itself. Candace had finally spoken up from the bed. "Zara, I know this is hard, but Brandon and I love each other. We didn't mean for it to happen this way." "You didn't mean to end up in my bed?" Zara had asked, her voice getting stronger with anger. "We didn't mean to fall in love," Candace had said as if that made it better. The next few hours had been a blur of accusations and tears. Brandon had told her he wanted a divorce immediately. He had said he had already talked to a lawyer, which meant he had been planning this for weeks or months while pretending everything was normal. "I'll be fair about the house and everything," he had said as if he was being generous. "But I think it's best if you move out as soon as possible. Candace and I need space to figure out our future." "Our house," Zara had said. "This is our house. My name is on the mortgage," Brandon had replied coldly. "And I make most of the money. Be realistic, Zara. You can't afford this place on a receptionist's salary." The cruelest part had been how quickly he had changed from the man she married into someone she didn't recognize. The Brandon she had loved would never have spoken to her so coldly. The Brandon she had married would never have betrayed her trust so completely. But standing in their bedroom, watching him pack her clothes while Candace sat wrapped in their bedsheets, Zara realized she had never really known him at all. "You can stay at your sister's place until you find an apartment," Brandon had said, stuffing her belongings into trash bags. "I'll give you 2 weeks to get everything moved out." 2 weeks. Zara had stared at him. "Brandon, we've been together for 8 years, married for 5. I deserve more than 2 weeks to process this." "Processing time won't change anything," he had said. "And the longer you stay, the harder it's going to be for everyone." By everyone he had meant himself and Candace. That night, Zara had driven to her sister Elena's apartment in tears. Elena had held her while she sobbed, promising that everything would be okay. But Zara had known it wouldn't be okay. Her entire life had been built around being Brandon's wife. Her identity, her future plans, her sense of self-worth, all of it had been tied to their marriage. The divorce had been swift and brutal. Brandon's lawyer had painted Zara as a dependent wife who had contributed nothing to their financial success. They had argued that since Brandon had built his business during their marriage, and since Zara had only worked part-time as a receptionist, she deserved minimal compensation. "She can work full-time now," Brandon's lawyer had said during mediation. "She's young and healthy. There's no reason she can't support herself." Zara's lawyer had been overworked and underpaid, handling her case as part of a legal aid program. He had done his best, but Brandon had resources that Zara didn't have. In the end, she had received a small settlement that barely covered her moving expenses and first month's rent on a tiny studio apartment. Brandon had kept the house, the cars, and his business. Candace had moved in immediately after the divorce was finalized. The worst part had been the isolation. Most of their friends had been Brandon's friends first, and they had chosen sides quickly. The few people who had tried to stay neutral had eventually drifted away, uncomfortable with the drama. Zara had found herself completely alone in a city where she had lived her entire adult life. She had worked 3 jobs just to pay rent and buy groceries. During the day she had worked at a medical clinic. In the evenings she had cleaned office buildings. On weekends she had worked at a coffee shop. For 2 years she had barely survived. She had been too proud to ask Elena for help beyond that first night, and too ashamed to let anyone know how much she was struggling. She had told people she was doing fine and starting over, but the truth was that she had been drowning. The depression had been the worst part. Some days she had barely been able to get out of bed. She had eaten cereal for dinner and worn the same clothes multiple days in a row because she couldn't afford the laundromat. She had canceled her cell phone service and avoided social situations because she couldn't afford to participate in normal activities. Brandon had made sure everyone knew about her struggles. He had spread stories about her falling apart after the divorce, painting himself as the victim who had tried to help an unstable ex-wife. According to him, Zara was bitter and desperate, unable to accept that he had moved on with his life. Standing in the reunion ballroom now, surrounded by people who believed Brandon's version of events, Zara realized he had been setting up this moment for 3 years. Every story he had told, every seed of doubt he had planted about her character, had been leading to this public humiliation. But what Brandon didn't know was that Zara's story hadn't ended with their divorce. What he didn't know was that her real life had begun the day she met Gabriel Thompson in that little coffee shop where she had been working to survive. What he didn't know was that the broken, desperate woman he remembered no longer existed. The months following Zara's divorce had been the darkest period of her life. Living in a 400-square-foot studio apartment with paper-thin walls, she could hear her neighbors' every conversation and footstep. The building smelled like old grease and cigarettes, and the radiator clanked so loudly at night that she barely slept. Her 3 jobs had consumed every hour of her day. At the medical clinic where she worked as a receptionist, she answered phones and filed insurance claims from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. The pay was barely above minimum wage and she had no benefits. Her supervisor, Mrs. Patterson, had made it clear that Zara was replaceable. "You seem distracted lately," Mrs. Patterson had said during one of their weekly meetings. "Personal problems shouldn't affect your work performance." Zara had nodded and promised to do better, even though she was already working as hard as she could. She couldn't afford to lose any of her jobs. From 4 p.m. to 10 p.m., she cleaned office buildings downtown. The work was physically demanding, and she often came home with aching knees and chemical burns on her hands from the harsh cleaning supplies. The building manager, Mr. Lopez, paid her in cash and sometimes tried to short her hours. "You were here from 4 to 9:30, not 10, he would say, knowing she had no way to prove otherwise. Zara had learned to take photos of the time clocks to protect herself, but even then, arguing with Mr. Lopez meant risking her job. On weekends, she worked at Brewster's Coffee House, a small shop near the University District. The owner, Mrs. Chen, was kinder than her other bosses, but the pay was mostly tips, which meant her income fluctuated wildly depending on how busy they were. The worst part wasn't the physical exhaustion or the financial stress. The worst part was the isolation. Elena had tried to stay in touch, calling regularly and inviting Zara to family dinners. But Zara had been too ashamed to accept help. She had told Elena she was doing fine, that she just needed time to get back on her feet. "You don't have to be so independent all the time," Elena had said during one of their phone calls. "Mom and Dad would help you if you asked." "I would help you. But Zara couldn't bear the thought of being pitted by her family. She had always been the responsible one, the one who made good choices and had her life together. Admitting that she was struggling felt like admitting failure. The depression had crept in slowly. At first, she had told herself she was just tired from working so much. Then she realized she wasn't enjoying anything anymore. Food tasted like cardboard. Movies couldn't hold her attention. She stopped reading, stopped listening to music, stopped caring about her appearance beyond what was required for work. Some mornings, she would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to find the energy to get up. The thought of facing another day of demanding customers, difficult bosses, and financial worry felt overwhelming. She would force herself up only because she knew losing any of her jobs would mean losing her apartment. Brandon's cruelty had continued even after the divorce was finalized. He would drive past her apartment building and text her photos of his new house with Candace. He would post pictures on social media of expensive dinners and weekend trips, making sure she saw how well he was doing without her. "Hope you're doing okay," he had texted once, along with a photo of him and Candace on a beach vacation. "Looks like you're working at that coffee shop now. Good for you for staying busy." The fake concern in his messages had hurt more than outright insults would have. He was pretending to care while actually making sure she knew how much better his life was without her. Candace had been even worse. She had started shopping at the grocery store where Zara bought her discount food, always managing to run into her in the cereal aisle or by the marked-down produce. "Oh, Zara," Candace would say, acting surprised. "How are you doing? You look tired. Are you taking care of yourself?" These encounters always happened when Zara looked her worst after working a double shift, or when she was buying generic mac and cheese because it was all she could afford. Candace, meanwhile, would have a cart full of organic vegetables and premium products. "Brandon worries about you sometimes," Candace would say. "He says you've been having a hard time adjusting to single life. Have you thought about seeing a therapist? I could recommend someone." The fake sympathy had been designed to make Zara feel even smaller than she already did. And it had worked. After 18 months of barely surviving, Zara had realized she needed to make a change or she would completely break down. She had started taking online classes toward a business degree, using student loans to pay the tuition. It meant taking on debt, but she had hoped it would eventually lead to better opportunities. Studying had been difficult while working 3 jobs. She would do homework in the break room at the medical clinic, read textbooks on the bus between jobs, and write papers late at night in her tiny apartment. Her grades weren't perfect, but she was passing. The online classes had also given her something to hope for. For the first time since the divorce, she had a goal that wasn't just about surviving until the next paycheck. She had started to imagine a future where she might have a career instead of just jobs. But the progress had been slow, and there were still days when the weight of everything felt crushing. There were still nights when she cried herself to sleep, wondering if she would ever feel truly happy again. The loneliness had been the hardest part. She had lost touch with most of her friends after the divorce. The few people who had tried to maintain relationships with both her and Brandon had eventually given up when it became clear that socializing with Zara meant dealing with drama and sadness. She had tried dating a few times, but it had been disasters. The men she met seemed to sense her vulnerability and either tried to take advantage of it or were put off by her emotional baggage. She had realized she wasn't ready for a relationship when she couldn't even take care of herself properly. By the time she met Gabriel, Zara had been working at Brewster's Coffee House for 8 months. She had gotten good at hiding her struggles behind a professional smile and efficient service. Most customers saw her as the friendly barista who remembered their orders, not as a woman barely holding her life together. She had been proud of small victories, making rent 3 months in a row, getting an A on a particularly difficult assignment, buying herself a new pair of shoes when her old ones wore out. These tiny steps forward had felt like major accomplishments after so much time moving backward. But standing in the reunion ballroom now, facing Brandon's public humiliation, all those dark memories came flooding back. The shame, the desperation, the feeling of being completely worthless, it all threatened to overwhelm her again. The difference was that now she knew those feelings were lies. Brandon's version of her story was based on the woman she had been at her lowest point, not the woman she had become. He was counting on her still being that broken, desperate person he had left behind. What he didn't know was that meeting Gabriel hadn't just changed her circumstances. It had changed her entire understanding of her own worth. Gabriel Thompson had walked into Brewster's Coffee House on a rainy Thursday morning in March, exactly 18 months ago. Zara remembered the exact date because it was the anniversary of her divorce being finalized, and she had been having one of her darker days. She had been working the morning shift alone because Mrs. Chen's other employee had called in sick. The coffee shop was busy with the usual crowd of university students and office workers grabbing their morning caffeine before starting their day. Gabriel had stood out immediately, not because of his clothes. He wore a simple navy sweater and jeans, but because of the way he carried himself. There was a quiet confidence about him that made people naturally step aside as he approached the counter. "Good morning," he had said, and his voice was warm despite the formal greeting. "Could I get a large coffee, black, and whatever pastry you'd recommend?" Zara had been surprised by the question. Most customers knew exactly what they wanted and ordered quickly so they could get on with their day. But Gabriel seemed genuinely interested in her recommendation. "The cinnamon scones are really good," she had said. "Mrs. Chen makes them fresh every morning." "Perfect," he had smiled. "I'll trust your judgment." While she prepared his order, Gabriel had asked about the coffee shop, how long it had been open, whether she enjoyed working there, if the owner was local. His questions weren't intrusive, just the kind of polite conversation that most people had forgotten how to make. "Are you a student at the university?" he had asked when she handed him his coffee. "Part-time," Zara had said. "Online classes mostly. I'm working on a business degree." "That's impressive," Gabriel had said, and he seemed to mean it. Working and studying at the same time takes a lot of dedication. It had been such a simple comment, but Zara hadn't heard anyone call her efforts impressive in a very long time. Most people, when they learned about her situation, either pitied her or assumed she was failing at both work and school. Gabriel had become a regular customer over the next few weeks. He came in every Tuesday and Thursday morning, always ordered the same black coffee, and always asked for Zara's pastry recommendation. They had developed an easy rapport, chatting about her classes, the weather, books they were reading. Zara had learned that he worked in technology, traveled frequently for business, and had recently moved to the city. He never talked about his work in detail, and she had assumed he was probably a software developer or consultant successful enough to afford daily coffee shop visits, but not wealthy enough to be shopping anywhere fancier than Brewster's. After about a month of regular visits, Gabriel had asked if she would like to have dinner with him. "I know a place that serves excellent pasta," he had said. "Nothing fancy, but the food is authentic and the atmosphere is relaxed." Zara had been tempted but also terrified. She hadn't dated anyone seriously since her divorce, and she wasn't sure she was ready. "I should probably mention," she had said carefully, "that I'm recently divorced. Like very recently. I'm not sure I'm ready for anything complicated." Gabriel had nodded thoughtfully. "Would it help if I promised to keep things simple? Just dinner between friends who enjoy talking to each other." Something about the way he said it had convinced her to say yes. Their first dinner had been at a small Italian restaurant where the owner greeted Gabriel by name and insisted on sending out extra courses for the beautiful lady. The food had been incredible, but what Zara remembered most was how easy it had been to talk to Gabriel. He had asked about her studies, her goals for the future, her thoughts on everything from movies to politics. But he had also really listened to her answers. He had asked follow-up questions that showed he was paying attention, not just waiting for his turn to talk. "What kind of business are you hoping to start eventually?" he had asked over dessert. Zara had hesitated. She had never told anyone about her business ideas because they seemed too ambitious for someone in her situation. "I've been thinking about event planning," she had said finally. "I used to help organize things in high school and college and I really enjoyed it. Weddings, corporate events, that kind of thing." "That's a great field," Gabriel had said. "There's a lot of creativity involved, but it also requires strong organizational skills and business sense. Do you have experience with project management?" They had talked for 2 hours about business plans, marketing strategies, and the challenges of starting a service-based company. Gabriel had offered insights and suggestions without ever making Zara feel like he was lecturing her or talking down to her. When he drove her home that night, Zara had realized it was the first time in years that she had forgotten about her problems for an entire evening. Their relationship had developed slowly over the next few months. Gabriel had been patient with her hesitation about commitment, understanding about her financial limitations, and respectful of her emotional boundaries. He had never pushed for more than she was ready to give. He had also been generous in ways that didn't make her feel like charity. When her car broke down, he had offered to drive her to work without making a big deal about it. When she mentioned struggling with a particularly difficult class, he had offered to help her study. When her apartment's heat stopped working in the middle of winter, he had invited her to stay at his place until it was fixed. It had taken Zara 3 months to realize that Gabriel's place was actually a penthouse apartment in the city's most expensive building. It had taken her another month to learn that his technology work Involved running a company that developed software for major corporations worldwide. "Why didn't you tell me?" she had asked when she finally understood the scope of his success. "Would it have changed how you treated me?" Gabriel had asked. Zara had thought about it honestly. "It might have. I probably would have been intimidated. That's why I didn't tell you," he had said simply. "I wanted you to get to know me, not my bank account." The revelation about Gabriel's wealth had been overwhelming at first. Zara had worried that she wasn't sophisticated enough, educated enough, or successful enough to fit into his world. She had tried to pull back from the relationship, convinced that he would eventually realize she wasn't good enough for him. But Gabriel had been persistent in the gentlest way. He had continued asking her to dinner, continued helping with her studies, continued treating her like she was the most interesting person he had ever met. Slowly, Zara had begun to believe that maybe she was worthy of his affection. The turning point had come when Gabriel met Elena and her family at a barbecue. Zara had been nervous about introducing him to her sister, worried that Elena would think she was gold-digging or rebounding too quickly from her divorce. Instead, Elena had pulled Zara aside after dinner and said, "That man is completely in love with you. And more importantly, he makes you laugh again. I haven't seen you really laugh in 3 years." That night, Zara had realized that she was in love with Gabriel too. Their engagement had been simple and perfect. Gabriel had proposed during one of their regular walks through the city park, with a ring he had designed specifically for her, elegant but not ostentatious, beautiful but practical enough for everyday wear. "I know this is fast," he had said, getting down on one knee by the fountain where they had shared their first kiss. "But I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you make me." Zara had said yes immediately, not because Gabriel was wealthy but because he was kind. Not because he could give her security but because he made her feel valuable. Not because he could rescue her from her struggles, but because he believed she was strong enough to overcome anything. Standing in the reunion ballroom now, surrounded by people who believed Brandon's lies about her being a gold digger, Zara held on to the memory of that proposal. She remembered the way Gabriel had looked at her, not like she was damaged goods or a charity case, but like she was a prize he couldn't believe he was lucky enough to win. The 6 months between Zara's engagement and wedding had been a whirlwind of change, not just in her circumstances but in her understanding of herself. Gabriel had insisted on paying off her student loans, despite her protests. "It's not charity," he had said when she argued about accepting his help. "It's an investment in our future together. I want you to have the freedom to pursue your dreams without worrying about debt." With the financial pressure removed, Zara had been able to focus on her final semester of classes. Her grades had improved dramatically and she had graduated with honors. Gabriel had been prouder of her academic achievement than she had been of herself. "You did this," he had said at her graduation party, a small gathering of Elena's family and a few friends from school. "Nobody else could have worked 3 jobs and completed a degree at the same time. You should be proud of your strength." It had been the first time anyone had called her strong since her divorce. Brandon had always made her feel weak and dependent. Gabriel made her feel capable and resilient. The wedding planning had been another source of anxiety for Zara. Gabriel had wanted to give her whatever kind of celebration she dreamed of, but she had been overwhelmed by the options and worried about the cost. "I don't need anything elaborate," she had said. "I just want our families there and maybe a few close friends." "What do you want, though?" Gabriel had asked. "Not what you think you should want, not what seems reasonable, what would make you happiest?" When Zara really thought about it, she had wanted something beautiful but intimate. She had dreamed of an outdoor ceremony with flowers everywhere, followed by dinner and dancing with the people they loved most. Gabriel had made it happen perfectly. They had been married in the garden of a historic mansion outside the city, with Elena as her maid of honor and Gabriel's business partner James as his best man. The ceremony had been simple and heartfelt, focused on their promises to each other rather than expensive decorations. Zara's dress had been the one indulgence Gabriel had insisted on. He had taken her to an exclusive boutique where the designer had created something custom just for her, elegant and timeless, but uniquely Zara's style. When she had seen herself in the mirror wearing it, she had cried. "I look like a bride," she had whispered. "You look like yourself," Gabriel had said when he saw her on their wedding day. "You look beautiful." The reception had been magical. They had danced to songs that meant something to them, eaten food they had chosen together, and celebrated with people who truly wanted them to be happy. Elena had given a toast that made everyone cry, talking about how she had watched her sister transform from someone who had lost hope into someone who radiated joy. "Gabriel didn't rescue Zara," Elena had said. "He just reminded her who she already was." After the wedding, Gabriel had surprised Zara with a honeymoon in Tuscany. She had never been to Europe, had never imagined she would have the opportunity to travel somewhere so beautiful. They had spent 2 weeks exploring small towns, eating incredible food and talking about their future. "I want you to know," Gabriel had said one evening as they watched the sunset from their villa's terrace, "that none of this is about changing you or fixing you. You were never broken, Zara. You were just in a situation that didn't allow you to flourish." Coming home to their life together had been another adjustment. Gabriel's penthouse apartment was now their home, and Zara had struggled with feeling like she belonged in such an elegant space. Everything was beautiful and expensive, from the furniture to the art on the walls. "It doesn't feel like me," she had confessed to Gabriel after a few weeks of marriage. "Then let's make it ours," he had said. "Change whatever you want. Add whatever would make you comfortable. This is your home now." Together, they had redecorated several rooms to reflect both of their personalities. Zara had added color and warmth to the modern minimalism Gabriel preferred. They had hung photos from their wedding and honeymoon alongside Gabriel's collection of contemporary art. She had installed a reading nook by the windows where she could study for the additional certifications she was pursuing in event planning. Gabriel had also encouraged Zara to start her own business sooner than she had planned. With his support, both emotional and financial, she had launched Zara Events 6 months after their wedding. Her first client had been a college friend who needed help planning her engagement party. "I can't afford much," the friend had said apologetically. "That's okay," Zara had replied. "Let's focus on making it beautiful within your budget." The party had been a huge success, and word had spread quickly through their social network. Within 3 months, Zara had more clients than she could handle alone. Gabriel had helped her hire 2 assistants and rent office space in a building downtown. The business had grown rapidly, partly because of Zara's talent and work ethic, but also because Gabriel's connections in the corporate world had provided opportunities for larger events. He had never pushed his colleagues to hire her, but when they saw the quality of her work, they had started recommending her to others. "I don't want people to think I'm only successful because of my husband," Zara had worried during the early days of the business. "Anyone who works with you for 5 minutes will know better," Gabriel had assured her. "Your success is your own." He had been right. Zara's clients praised her creativity, organization, and ability to manage complex events smoothly. She had developed a reputation for being able to handle any crisis calmly and finding solutions that kept everyone happy. The financial security had been life-changing, but the emotional transformation had been even more significant. Zara had rediscovered parts of herself that had been buried during her marriage to Brandon and the difficult years after their divorce. She had started painting again, a hobby she had abandoned in college. Gabriel had converted one of the spare bedrooms into an art studio for her, stocking it with supplies and encouraging her to explore her creativity. She had also reconnected with old friends who had drifted away during her darkest period. With confidence and stability restored, she had been able to reach out and rebuild relationships that had been damaged by her isolation and depression. Most importantly, she had learned to see herself through Gabriel's eyes. He treated her like she was intelligent, capable, and valuable. He asked for her opinions on everything from business decisions to what they should have for dinner. He celebrated her achievements and supported her through challenges. "You make me want to be better," she had told him on their first anniversary. "You make me happier than I ever thought possible," he had replied. Now, standing in the reunion ballroom while Brandon tried to convince everyone that she was still the desperate, broken woman he had divorced, Zara felt the strength that Gabriel had helped her rediscover. She was no longer the person who could be destroyed by cruel words and public humiliation. She was Gabriel's wife, but more than that, she was herself again. The confidence Gabriel had nurtured in her rose up like armor against Brandon's attacks. She straightened her shoulders and prepared to defend herself, knowing that no matter what happened in this room, she would go home to a man who loved her completely. What she didn't know was that Gabriel was already on his way to stand beside her. 2 weeks before the reunion, Zara had stood in the closet of their penthouse bedroom, staring at the invitation that had arrived in their mail. Lincoln High School class of 2010 15-year reunion. The envelope had been forwarded from her old address 3 times before reaching her. "You don't have to go," Gabriel had said, reading over her shoulder. "You don't owe these people anything." Zara had turned the invitation over in her hands. Part of her wanted to throw it away and pretend she had never received it. The thought of seeing Brandon again made her stomach twist with anxiety. But another part of her wanted to face her past with her head held high. "I think I need to go," she had said finally. "Not for them but for me." Gabriel had studied her face carefully. He had learned to read her expressions over the past 18 months, and he could see the determination building in her eyes. "Then we'll go together?" he had said. "No," Zara had replied quickly. "I want to do this alone." Gabriel had frowned. "Zara, you don't have to prove anything to these people. And you definitely don't have to face Brandon without support." "I know I don't have to," Zara had said, sitting on the edge of their bed. "But I want to. I need to show myself that I can walk into that room as the person I am now, not the person I was when I left town." They had talked about it for hours over dinner. Gabriel had been worried about Brandon's potential for cruelty, knowing how badly the divorce had affected Zara's self-esteem. He had also been concerned about the practical aspects: Zara driving alone to a hotel an hour away, being in an unfamiliar place without backup if things went badly. "What if I came with you but stayed at the hotel?" Gabriel had suggested. "That way you could face everyone on your own terms, but I'd be nearby if you needed me." Zara had been touched by his concern, but she had felt strongly about going alone. "I spent 3 years feeling like a victim," she had explained. "First as Brandon's wife when he was cheating on me, then as his ex-wife when I was struggling to rebuild my life. I don't want to be a victim anymore. I want to walk into that reunion as an equal." Gabriel had eventually agreed, but he had insisted on certain precautions. He had made sure Zara's phone was fully charged and that she had his personal assistant's number as backup. He had booked her a suite at the finest hotel in town, ensuring she would have a comfortable retreat if the evening became overwhelming. "Text me every hour," he had said. "Even if it's just to say you're okay. I'll be worried until you get home safely." The night before the reunion, Zara had changed her outfit 3 times. She had finally settled on a navy blue dress that Gabriel had bought her for a corporate event, elegant and sophisticated without being flashy. Her jewelry was simple but clearly expensive, and her hair was styled in a way that looked effortless but had taken her salon appointment that afternoon. Standing in front of their bedroom mirror, Zara had barely recognized herself compared to the woman she had been 3 years ago. The stress lines around her eyes had faded. Her hair was shiny and healthy again. She carried herself with confidence that came from being loved and valued. "You look stunning," Gabriel had said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "But more importantly, you look happy." "I am happy," Zara had said, meaning it completely. The morning of the reunion, Gabriel had made her breakfast and packed snacks for her drive. He had been unusually quiet, and Zara could tell he was still worried about letting her go alone. "I'll be fine," she had assured him. "It's just a few hours. What's the worst that could happen?" Gabriel had given her a look that suggested he could imagine several worst-case scenarios, but he had kissed her goodbye and made her promise to call when she arrived safely. The drive to the hotel had been peaceful. Zara had played music that made her feel confident and strong, singing along to songs that reminded her of her new life with Gabriel. She had felt prepared for whatever the evening might bring. Checking into the hotel had been another boost to her confidence. The staff had treated her like the VIP guest she was, thanks to Gabriel's arrangements. The suite was beautiful, with fresh flowers and a bottle of champagne waiting for her arrival. Getting ready for the reunion had felt like putting on armor. Each piece of clothing, each stroke of makeup, each spritz of perfume had been chosen to present the best version of herself. She had wanted everyone to see that she had not just survived her divorce, she had thrived. Walking into the hotel ballroom, Zara had felt ready for anything. She had expected some awkward conversations and maybe a few uncomfortable moments with Brandon. She had prepared herself for questions about her new life and marriage. What she hadn't prepared for was an ambush. Looking back now, she realized there had been warning signs. The way conversations stopped when she entered rooms. The way former classmates had looked at her with pity rather than curiosity. The way Brandon and Candace had been positioned near the entrance, as if they were waiting for her. But in her confidence and happiness, Zara had missed the signs. She had interpreted the stares as surprise at how well she looked, not as judgment based on stories they had already heard. She had thought the whispers were normal reunion gossip, not specific rumors about her supposed desperation and lies. Now, standing in the center of the ballroom while Brandon systematically destroyed her reputation, Zara understood that this had been planned. He had spent months, maybe years, preparing for this moment. He had wanted her to come to the reunion feeling confident so that her public humiliation would be more complete. The cruelest part was that Brandon had used her genuine love for Gabriel against her. He had taken the most beautiful thing that had ever happened to her, meeting and marrying Gabriel, and twisted it into evidence of her supposed deception and desperation. But as the crowd continued to stare at her with pity and judgment, Zara held on to the truth that Brandon couldn't destroy. She was loved. She was valued. She was strong. And Gabriel, who had wanted to protect her from exactly this situation, was probably at home wondering why she hadn't texted him in over an hour. What Zara didn't know was that Gabriel's worry had already driven him to track her phone's location. What she didn't know was that he was already in his car, driving toward the hotel as fast as legally possible. What she didn't know was that her rescue was already on the way. The crowd around Zara had grown larger as more people were drawn to the drama. She could see faces she recognized from high school people who had once been friendly acquaintances now looking at her with mixture of pity and disgust. The sad thing is, Brandon continued, his voice carrying easily across the ballroom, she's so deep in this fantasy that she actually believes it herself. Look at that dress probably rented for the evening. Look at that jewelry, decent knockoffs, but you can tell if you know what to look for. Zara's hand instinctively went to the necklace Gabriel had given her for their 6-month anniversary. It was a simple strand of pearls, but she knew they were real and had cost more than most people's monthly salary. But how could she prove that without sounding defensive and desperate? I've been tracking her social media, Candace chimed in, holding up her phone. Look at these photos she's been posting. That's not even her house, you can tell because the furniture changes between pictures. She's clearly using other people's photos to create this fake lifestyle. The crowd pressed closer to look at Candace's phone. Zara wanted to explain that their penthouse had been redecorated several times as she made it more comfortable, but she knew anything she said would sound like excuses. And this car, Candace continued, swiping through photos. She posted a picture standing next to this expensive car, claiming it's hers. But look at the reflection in the window, you can see she took the photo from the sidewalk. She doesn't even have keys to it. The observation was partially true. Gabriel owned several cars and Zara often took pictures with them when they were out together. But she rarely drove them herself because she preferred her more modest SUV for daily errands. To the crowd, though, Candace's explanation seemed much more plausible than the truth. The most pathetic part, said Jessica Martinez, their former class vice president, is that she's trying so hard to make us believe this fantasy. Like, why not just be honest about your situation? There's no shame in struggling after a divorce. There is shame in lying about it, added Robert Kim, who had been captain of the debate team. Especially when you're trying to deceive some innocent man online. That's actually criminal fraud, isn't it? The accusation hung in the air like a physical blow. Zara opened her mouth to defend herself, but Brandon spoke over her. I've been worried about that too, he said, his voice full of fake concern. If she's catfishing someone claiming to be rich when she's actually desperate, that's a serious crime. The FBI investigates that kind of online fraud. Maybe we should call the police, suggested Michelle Cooper. If she's scamming someone, we have a responsibility to protect the victim. The crowd murmured agreement. Zara felt like she was trapped in a nightmare where everyone had decided she was guilty before she had a chance to defend herself. Every explanation she could offer sounded implausible compared to Brandon's carefully constructed lies. Please, Zara said, her voice barely audible over the crowd. You're all wrong about this. If you would just let me explain. Explain what? Brandon interrupted. How you've been lying to everyone for months. How you've created this elaborate fantasy to make yourself feel better about being a failure. I'm not a failure, Zara said, her voice getting stronger. I own my own business. I'm successful in my own right. The crowd laughed and the sound cut through her like a knife. Oh honey, said Amanda Foster, their former homecoming queen. You don't have to keep lying. We all know you're working as a barista. There's nothing wrong with that, service jobs are honest work. But pretending to own a business when you're making coffee for minimum wage is just sad. I do own a business, Zara insisted. Zara Events. I plan corporate functions and weddings. I have employees and an office downtown. Sure you do, Candace said with a smirk. And I'm sure your imaginary billionaire husband helped you start this imaginary business with his imaginary money. The crowd laughed again, and several people pulled out their phones to record Zara's humiliation. She realized that this moment was going to be shared on social media, preserved forever as evidence of her supposed mental breakdown. You know what I think happened? Said Brian Walsh, Jennifer's brother. I think she met some guy online who told her he was rich and she fell for it completely. Now she's so embarrassed about being catfished herself that she's doubled down on the lies. That actually makes sense, agreed Robert Kim. She's been scammed, but she's too proud to admit it. So she keeps pretending the relationship is real, even though he's probably just some guy in another country stealing photos from actual rich people. The new theory spread through the crowd like wildfire. It was even more humiliating than being called a gold digger, because it painted her as both desperate and stupid. According to this version of events, she wasn't even successfully manipulating someone, she was being manipulated herself. Zara, said Mrs. Rodriguez, their former Spanish teacher who had come to the reunion as a special guest. Dear, if someone is taking advantage of you online, there are resources that can help. You don't have to be embarrassed about being a victim of fraud. The kindness in her teacher's voice almost broke Zara's resolve. Mrs. Rodriguez genuinely believed she was helping, which made the situation even more painful. Everyone in the room was so convinced by Brandon's lies that they were treating her like a victim of mental illness or criminal fraud. I'm not being scammed, Zara said desperately. Gabriel is real. Our marriage is real. Everything I've told you is true. Gabriel? Brandon laughed. Even the name sounds fake. Let me guess, he's tall, dark, and handsome? He swept you off your feet with romantic gestures and promises of a better life? He told you he's a billionaire but asked you to keep your relationship secret for some reason. Each point hit close enough to the truth to sound believable as a scam. Gabriel was handsome, their courtship had been romantic, and they had kept their relationship relatively private during the early months. To people who wanted to believe Brandon's version, it sounded exactly like a textbook romance scam. If he's real, said Jennifer Walsh, then where is he? Why isn't he here with you? What kind of loving husband lets his wife go to her high school reunion alone? The question stung because it was exactly what Gabriel had asked. He had wanted to come with her, and she had insisted on coming alone. Now her independence looked like evidence that she was lying about being married at all. He wanted to come, Zara said weakly. I told him I wanted to do this alone. Of course he wanted to come, Candace said mockingly. Because he doesn't exist, so it's easy for him to want things. It's like having an imaginary friend who agrees with everything you say. The crowd laughed again, and Zara felt her confidence crumbling. She had walked into this room feeling strong and successful, ready to show everyone how well she was doing. Instead, she was being systematically destroyed by people who had already decided she was a liar and a fraud. She looked around the room, desperately searching for even one sympathetic face. But everyone was either laughing at her or looking at her with pity. The people who had known her in high school, who had seen her as a responsible and honest person, now believed she had become delusional and desperate. I think we've humiliated her enough, said Mrs. Rodriguez gently. Perhaps we should. She was interrupted by the sound of the ballroom doors opening. Every head turned toward the entrance, expecting to see another classmate arriving late to the reunion. Instead, a man in an expensive suit walked into the room with the kind of presence that made everyone automatically step aside. Zara's heart stopped. Gabriel had come after all. Gabriel Thompson walked through the ballroom doors like he owned the building. He was tall and commanding, with the kind of quiet authority that made people instinctively move out of his way. His charcoal gray suit was perfectly tailored, his black hair was styled without looking overdone, and his dark eyes swept the room until they found Zara's face. The ballroom, which had been buzzing with cruel laughter moments before, fell completely silent. Gabriel's expression was calm, but Zara could see the steel in his eyes. She had seen that look once before when a contractor had tried to cheat her during the early days of her business. Gabriel had been polite and professional, but utterly ruthless in protecting what mattered to him. Right now, what mattered to him was his wife. I'm sorry I'm late, darling, Gabriel said, walking directly to Zara and taking her hand. His voice carried easily across the silent room, and it held the kind of educated authority that came from boardroom presentations and business negotiations. The meeting ran longer than expected. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture that was both protective and possessive. The ring on his finger caught the light, a platinum wedding band that matched the one on Zara's hand. Gabriel, Zara breathed, relief flooding through her. You came. Of course I came, he said softly, meant only for her. You stopped texting. I was worried. Then he turned to face the crowd that had been tormenting his wife, and his expression became coolly professional. I don't believe we've been introduced, he said, extending his hand toward Brandon. I'm Gabriel Thompson, Zara's husband. The gesture was perfectly polite, but there was something in Gabriel's tone that made it clear he knew exactly what had been happening. Brandon hesitated for a moment, then shook his hand. Brandon Matthews, he said, trying to maintain his confident demeanor. Zara's ex-husband. Ah, Gabriel said simply, but the single syllable conveyed volumes. I've heard about you. The crowd was still staring, trying to process what they were seeing. Gabriel was obviously real, obviously wealthy, and obviously devoted to Zara. Their entire narrative about her being a desperate liar was crumbling before their eyes. But Brandon wasn't ready to give up. Well, this is unexpected, Brandon said, forcing a laugh. I have to admit, we were all starting to think Zara was making you up. She's been posting pictures and telling stories, but you never seem to show up anywhere. Gabriel's smile was polite and dangerous. Zara and I value our privacy. We don't feel the need to document every moment of our lives for social media validation. The comment was delivered with surgical precision. It pointed out that Brandon and Candace were the type of people who needed constant public attention, while Gabriel and Zara were secure enough in their relationship to keep it private. Of course, Brandon said quickly. Privacy is important. It's just that some of the stories seemed a little elaborate. Like the thing about owning a business and living in a penthouse. You know how people sometimes exaggerate their success. Gabriel's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air around him. When he spoke, his voice was conversational, but everyone in the room could feel the underlying steel. Zara Events is one of the most sought-after event planning companies in the city, he said. My wife has planned corporate functions for several Fortune 500 companies, including my own. She has a waiting list of clients and had to hire additional staff to keep up with demand. He paused, letting that sink in. As for our living situation, Gabriel continued smoothly, we have a penthouse in the Meridian Tower, a house in the Hamptons, and a villa in Tuscany. But I'm curious about why you would assume my wife was exaggerating her success. Do you have some reason to doubt her integrity? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Gabriel had turned the tables completely. Instead of Zara having to defend herself against accusations of lying, Brandon now had to explain why he had been spreading rumors about her character. Candace stepped forward, trying to help her husband recover. We weren't trying to spread rumors, she said sweetly. We were just concerned about Zara. Some of the things she was claiming seemed too good to be true, and we worried she might be having some kind of episode. Gabriel's gaze shifted to Candace, and she actually took a step backward. How thoughtful of you to be concerned about my wife's mental health, Gabriel said, his tone so polite it was almost mocking. I'm sure that concern has nothing to do with the fact that you're the woman who destroyed her previous marriage. The crowd gasped. Gabriel had just publicly identified Candace as Brandon's affair partner, stripping away any pretense that she had moral authority to judge anyone else's behavior. Now wait just a minute, Brandon said, his face reddening. That's ancient history. Candace and I fell in love, and yes, the timing was unfortunate, but the timing, Gabriel interrupted, was when you were still married to my wife. Which makes your concern about her current happiness seem somewhat insincere. Gabriel's command of the situation was absolute. He wasn't raising his voice or making threats, but everyone in the room could feel his power. This was a man who was accustomed to winning, who had built an empire through intelligence and strategy. Look, Brandon said desperately, I don't know what game you're playing here, but... Game? Gabriel's eyebrows rose slightly. Mr. Matthews, I'm not playing anything. I'm simply wondering why you felt it was appropriate to publicly humiliate my wife at what should have been a pleasant social gathering. The crowd was starting to shift uncomfortably. What had seemed like justified concern about Zara's mental state now looked like cruel bullying orchestrated by her ex-husband and his wife. Gabriel reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. Perhaps we should clear up any remaining confusion about our circumstances. He tapped the screen a few times, then held up the phone so the crowd could see it. On the screen was a photo from their wedding, Zara in her custom gown, Gabriel in his tuxedo, both of them radiant with happiness. This is from our wedding 8 months ago, Gabriel said. The ceremony was at Waverly Estate, and the reception was catered by Lou Bernardine. About 60 guests, including Zara's sister Elena and my business partner James. Would anyone like to see more photos? He swiped to another image, Zara cutting the ribbon at the grand opening of her expanded office space. Gabriel was standing beside her, along with the mayor and several other dignitaries. This is from the opening of Zara Events' new headquarters 3 months ago, Gabriel continued. The mayor personally attended because my wife's company has become such an asset to the city's business community. With each photo, Brandon and Candace looked smaller and more desperate. Gabriel wasn't just defending Zara, he was systematically proving that every accusation they had made was not only false but malicious. Now, Gabriel said, putting his phone away and looking directly at Brandon, I think you owe my wife an apology. Brandon's face had gone from red to pale as Gabriel's evidence mounted. The crowd around them was murmuring, and Zara could see the moment when public opinion shifted. People who had been laughing at her moments before now looked ashamed and uncomfortable. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Brandon said weakly. No misunderstanding, Gabriel replied calmly. You deliberately orchestrated a campaign to humiliate my wife in front of people who knew her in high school. You spread lies about her character, her mental health, and our marriage. The only question is why. Gabriel's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it with what looked like satisfaction. Actually, he continued, I think we're about to get some answers to that question. He touched his screen and held up the phone so everyone could see. On it was what appeared to be a financial document. This is interesting, Gabriel said, his tone conversational. It seems that Matthews Real Estate filed for bankruptcy protection last month. According to these court documents, Mr. Matthews owes approximately $2 million to various creditors. Brandon's face went white. How did you get those documents? They're public record, Gabriel said mildly. Anyone can access bankruptcy filings. I had my assistant pull them during my drive here tonight. He swiped to another document. This one is particularly interesting. It shows that your house, the one you kept after your divorce from Zara, is in foreclosure. The bank is going to repossess it next month. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Brandon, who had been positioned as the successful ex-husband whose life had improved after leaving Zara, was actually facing financial ruin. Candace grabbed Brandon's arm. You said you were handling the business problems, she hissed, not quite quietly enough. I am handling them, Brandon snapped back. Gabriel smiled coolly. There's more. According to this employment record, Mrs. Matthews, that would be you, Candace was terminated from your position at Hartwell Marketing 3 weeks ago for falsifying expense reports. Candace's mouth fell open. That's confidential information. Not when it involves potential criminal charges for embezzlement, Gabriel replied. Which, according to this police report, are currently under investigation. The crowd was now staring at Brandon and Candace with the same mixture of shock and judgment they had directed at Zara earlier. The tables had turned completely. So let me see if I understand the situation, Gabriel continued, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent ballroom. A man facing bankruptcy and a woman under investigation for embezzlement decided to spend their evening publicly humiliating a successful businesswoman who has built a thriving company and married someone who loves her. Is that an accurate summary? You bastard, Brandon snarled, his mask of civility finally dropping. You think you can just throw money around and make yourself look good? You don't know what she was like when we were married. You don't know how manipulative she can be. Gabriel's expression didn't change, but something deadly quiet entered his voice. Manipulative, he repeated. Mr. Matthews, I've seen the divorce records. You cheated on your wife with your secretary, kicked her out of her own home with 2 weeks' notice, and left her with almost nothing while you kept all the marital assets. Then you spent 3 years spreading rumors about her supposed failures while she worked 3 jobs to rebuild her life. And you're calling her manipulative? The crowd was completely silent now. Several people had their phones out, recording what had become a spectacular reversal of fortune. She worked as a barista, Brandon said desperately. She was cleaning office buildings. She was barely surviving. Yes, Gabriel said quietly. She was surviving. After you destroyed her life, she got up every morning and worked 3 jobs while earning her degree. She never asked for help, never complained, never gave up. Do you know what that tells me about her character? He turned to look at Zara and his expression softened completely. It tells me she's the strongest person I've ever met. It tells me she has more integrity in her little finger than you have in your entire body. And it tells me that I'm the luckiest man alive because she chose to marry me. Zara felt tears starting in her eyes, but they were tears of gratitude rather than humiliation. Gabriel turned back to Brandon, and the softness disappeared. Now, he said, I believe you owe my wife an apology. A public apology to match the public humiliation you attempted. Brandon looked around the room desperately but found no allies. The crowd that had been supporting him earlier was now looking at him with disgust. His carefully planned ambush had backfired spectacularly. Brandon started then stopped. He's sorry, Candace said quickly. We both are. We didn't mean any harm. Gabriel's gaze shifted to her. Mrs. Matthews, you stood in front of a room full of people and suggested that my wife was mentally ill, criminally defrauding someone online, and living in a fantasy world. You encouraged people to call the police. That seems rather harmful to me. We were just concerned, Candace began. No, Gabriel interrupted. You were cruel. There's a difference. He looked around the room, making eye contact with several of the people who had been laughing at Zara earlier. I understand that some of you may have believed what Mr. and Mrs. Matthews were telling you, he said. But I hope you'll remember this evening the next time someone tries to convince you to participate in publicly humiliating another person. There's usually more to the story than what you're being told. The shame on many faces was obvious. People were starting to remember their own cruel laughter and comments, and they looked horrified at how easily they had been manipulated. Mrs. Rodriguez, their former teacher, stepped forward. "Zara," she said, her voice full of regret. "I'm so sorry. I should have known better than to believe such things about you. You were always one of my most honest and hard-working students." "It's okay, Mrs. Rodriguez," Zara said softly. "You were trying to help." "No excuses," the older woman said firmly. "I participated in something cruel and I'm ashamed of myself." Other voices started joining in, classmates who had known Zara in high school and should have trusted their own memories of her character instead of believing Brandon's lies. Gabriel put his arm around Zara's shoulders, pulling her close. "I think it's time we left," he said quietly. "Unless there's anything else you wanted to do here?" Zara looked around the room one last time. The people who had tormented her were now facing their own humiliation. The classmates who had joined in the cruel laughter were dealing with their shame. Justice had been served more thoroughly than she had ever imagined possible. "No," she said. "I'm ready to go home." As they walked toward the ballroom doors, Brandon called out one last desperate attempt to salvage his dignity. "This isn't over," he shouted. "You can't just buy your way out of everything." Gabriel paused at the door and turned back. "Mr. Matthews," he said calmly, "this was over the moment you decided to build your evening around cruelty instead of celebrating the achievements of your former classmates. I hope you and your wife find the help you clearly need." Then he escorted Zara out of the ballroom, leaving Brandon and Candace to face the judgment of people who now knew the truth about all of them. The hotel lobby felt like sanctuary after the toxic atmosphere of the reunion. Gabriel guided Zara to a quiet seating area away from the elevators, where they could have privacy to decompress from what had just happened. "Are you okay?" he asked, sitting beside her and taking her hands in his. Zara looked down at their intertwined fingers, her wedding ring catching the light next to his. 6 hours ago, she had been worried about proving herself to people whose opinions didn't actually matter. Now she felt like she had been reminded of what really mattered. "I'm more than okay," she said, meeting his eyes. "I'm grateful. Not just that you came, but that I got to see who I really am through your eyes instead of through theirs." Gabriel studied her face carefully. "You're not upset that I interfered? I know you wanted to handle this alone." "I'm not upset," Zara said firmly. "I'm proud. Proud to be married to someone who would drop everything and drive an hour to stand up for me. Proud to be with someone who saw through Brandon's manipulation immediately." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, processing the evening's events. Through the ballroom doors, they could hear the reunion continuing, but the energy had clearly changed. People were probably discussing what they had witnessed and hopefully learning from it. "How did you know to look up his financial records?" Zara asked. Gabriel smiled. "When you stopped texting, I started worrying. When I couldn't reach you by phone, I decided to drive over. But during the drive, I started thinking about why your ex-husband would want to humiliate you so publicly. People don't usually go to that much effort unless they're dealing with their own problems." "So you had your assistant research him?" "I have good people working for me," Gabriel said. "When I explained the situation, James had all that information within 20 minutes. Bankruptcy filings, employment records, criminal investigations, it's all public information if you know where to look." Zara shook her head in amazement. "Brandon thought he was so clever, setting up this whole scenario to make me look pathetic. He had no idea who he was dealing with." "He made the mistake of underestimating both of us," Gabriel agreed. "He saw you as the same broken person he left 3 years ago, and he assumed I was either fake or someone who could be intimidated." A hotel employee approached them discreetly. "Mr. Thompson? I'm the evening manager. I wanted to apologize for the disturbance in our ballroom tonight. We had no idea that event would become so contentious." "It's not your fault," Gabriel assured him. "You couldn't have predicted that some of the guests would behave so poorly. Is there anything we can do to make the rest of your evening more pleasant? Perhaps dinner in our restaurant, or—" Gabriel looked at Zara. "What do you think? Are you hungry?" Zara realized she was actually starving. The stress of the confrontation had masked her appetite, but now that the adrenaline was fading, she needed food. "Dinner sounds perfect," she said. The hotel restaurant was elegant and quiet, a perfect contrast to the chaos they had just left. Over wine and perfectly prepared food, they talked through everything that had happened. "I keep thinking about how easily people believed him," Zara said. "These were people who knew me in high school. They knew I wasn't a liar or manipulator. But Brandon painted this picture and they just accepted it. People want to believe they're smarter than everyone else, Gabriel said. When Brandon offered them the chance to feel superior to someone who appeared to be doing better than them, they took it. It made them feel good about their own choices. That's pretty depressing. It is, Gabriel agreed. But look what happened when they were presented with actual facts instead of gossip and speculation. Most of them were horrified by their own behavior. People can be cruel, but they can also learn from their mistakes. Their server brought dessert, a chocolate souffle they decided to share. As they ate, Zara felt the last of the evening's stress melting away. I have a confession, she said. Part of me is glad this happened. Gabriel raised an eyebrow. Really? Really? For 3 years, I've been carrying around this fear that maybe Brandon was right about me. Maybe I was weak, maybe I was a failure, maybe I didn't deserve good things. Tonight proved that those fears were just lies he planted in my head. You never needed tonight to prove your worth, Gabriel said gently. But I'm glad you feel more confident about it. I also realized something else, Zara continued. I don't need those people's approval. I don't need to prove anything to anyone from my past. The only opinions that matter are the ones from people who actually know me and love me now. Gabriel smiled. Like your sister Elena, who thinks I'm the luckiest man alive for winning your heart? Like my husband, who thinks I'm strong enough to handle anything, Zara replied. They finished dessert and headed up to Zara's suite. While Gabriel called the front desk to book himself a room for the night, Zara got a series of text messages. The first was from Elena. Just saw the video on Facebook. I am so proud of you and Gabriel right now. Also, Brandon is a pathetic loser. The second was from Mrs. Rodriguez. Zara, I hope you can forgive an old teacher for being so foolish tonight. You were always special, and I should have trusted my own judgment instead of listening to gossip. The third was from Jennifer Walsh. I owe you a huge apology. What we did tonight was wrong and I'm ashamed I participated. You were always kind to everyone in school, and you deserved better from us. More messages kept coming, classmates apologizing, expressing regret for their behavior, and praising Gabriel for standing up for her. Several people had apparently recorded the confrontation and shared it on social media, where it was generating discussions about bullying, jealousy, and the danger of believing rumors without evidence. Look at this, Zara said, showing Gabriel her phone. People are actually learning from what happened tonight. Gabriel read through the messages and smiled. Maybe some good will come out of Brandon's cruelty after all. As they got ready for bed, Zara reflected on how completely her perspective had changed in just a few hours. She had entered the reunion feeling like she needed to prove herself. She was ending the evening knowing that she didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Thank you, she said to Gabriel as they settled into bed together. For what? For knowing exactly who I am, even when I temporarily forgot. For loving me enough to drive an hour to make sure I was okay. For being the kind of man who defends his wife without making her feel weak. Gabriel pulled her close. Thank you for being the kind of woman who's worth defending. Thank you for working 3 jobs to put yourself through school instead of giving up. Thank you for building a business from nothing. Thank you for having the courage to love again after someone hurt you so badly. They fell asleep holding each other, both knowing that what had started as an attempt to humiliate Zara had instead become a celebration of their love and partnership. The next morning brought more messages, not just from classmates, but from potential clients who had seen the social media posts about Zara events and wanted to hire her company. The reunion disaster had accidentally become the best marketing campaign her business had ever received. Look at this, Zara said, showing Gabriel her phone over breakfast. 3 new inquiries for corporate events, and a request to plan a wedding for someone who saw the video and was impressed by how I handled the situation. Gabriel laughed. Brandon's plan to destroy your reputation ended up growing your business instead. Should I feel sorry for him? Zara asked. He's lost everything: his business, his house, his reputation. Gabriel considered the question seriously. You can feel sorry for him without excusing his behavior. He made choices that led to consequences. But that doesn't mean you have to hate him forever. I don't hate him, Zara realized. I actually feel free of him. For 3 years, he's been this dark voice in my head telling me I wasn't good enough. After last night, I can't hear that voice anymore. They drove home together, Zara's car following Gabriel's as they returned to their real life. As they pulled into the parking garage of their building, Zara felt like she was seeing everything with new eyes. Their penthouse apartment wasn't just beautiful, it was theirs. The business she had built wasn't just successful, it was hers. The love she shared with Gabriel wasn't too good to be true, it was real, and it was strong enough to weather any storm. That evening they had dinner with Elena and her family. Over takeout pizza and wine, they told the story of the reunion and its aftermath. Elena's children, Zara's nephews, listened wide-eyed to the tale of Uncle Gabriel rescuing Aunt Zara from the mean people. "It's like a fairy tale," said 8-year-old Miguel. "But with phones and hotels instead of castles." "The best fairy tales," Zara said, ruffling his hair, "are the ones that happen in real life." 6 months later, Zara Events was featured on the cover of a business magazine as one of the city's fastest-growing companies. The article mentioned her inspiring story of rebuilding her life after divorce and creating success through determination and hard work. Brandon and Candace had moved away after their various legal and financial problems became public knowledge. Zara heard through the grapevine that they were living with Candace's parents and trying to start over in another state. She genuinely hoped they would learn from their mistakes and build a better life for themselves. The reunion video still occasionally surfaced on social media, usually accompanied by discussions about karma, the danger of judging others, and the importance of standing up for the people you love. Zara had become an inadvertent symbol of resilience, and Gabriel had become the example of what a supportive partner should look like. But more than any public recognition or business success, what mattered most to Zara was the quiet moments with Gabriel, the morning coffee conversations, the walks through their neighborhood, the planning of their future together. She had learned that the best revenge wasn't public vindication or seeing your enemies fall. The best revenge was living so well that your past couldn't touch your present. And she was living very well indeed.